Welcome to the Bitcoin Business Podcast. Today I have an exciting guest here. We have Mitch Moore from Strong Wealth. He is the founder of this firm dedicated to helping Bitcoiners do financial planning. And I'm extremely excited to talk to Mitch today. So please say hello, Mitch.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat today. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, wonderful to have you here. I think there's a big overlap between what you guys are doing and what we're doing at Sovereign. You guys have been in the game longer than us. Looking forward to pick your brain on both Bitcoin business adoption, but also your general philosophy on financial planning around Bitcoin, which is very interesting. So, I guess the first place to start would be introducing yourself and letting the viewers know who you are, what you're all about. That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you mentioned, I'm the founder of Strong Wealth. It's a wealth management firm for Bitcoiners. We weren't always focused on Bitcoiners, but we've been in business for 3.5 years now. So, like you said before, I mean, we're really helping with financial planning in general. So, we go over everything from cash flow, investments, taxes, estate planning, insurance, planning for retirement, navigating that. So, really the full gamut of someone's finances. And, specifically here in the US, I'll say some of the things we may go over today may not be applicable to the audience outside of the US, but that's who we primarily focus on.
Wonderful. I would wager that the majority of our audience is in the US as well, so it's certainly fine for us to focus on that. Yeah, so tell me, I want to immediately jump on what you just said because it's something I find very interesting, and we think a lot about this at Sovereign. I heard you on Josh Friedman's podcast, Bitcoin, Business Bitcoinization, talking about this shift from the general broader market towards focusing on Bitcoiners. Can you walk me through um, what that kind of meant and why you think maybe that's the segment that you guys are in for? I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started the business about 3.5 years ago just by myself. And that was about the same time, or maybe shortly before that, that I came to Bitcoin. So this would have been 2020, 2021 timeframe. So obviously, we're going through COVID and everything that happened with that. And, Bitcoin is on this bull run during that time. And I was planning on starting this firm, financial planning firm. So I'm going to be advising people on their money. And so for me, I was looking at this Bitcoin thing like, hey, like, there's something here. I need to understand what this is to know if I should be recommending this to people or not. Should
Mm.
people be putting their money into this? And so, thankfully, I came to Bitcoin in the time when Saylor had done, a bunch of podcasts with Robert Breedlove and, Seyfedin's podcast and all his books, the Fiat Standard, Bitcoin Standard, all those things. And so, I was just consuming as much as I possibly could. And, eventually, when I did start this business, I was recommending Bitcoin as part of a portfolio, which is where I think maybe some financial planners, financial advisors are starting to get to just today. But that's where I was back, in that time frame.
Mm.
However, we weren't focused on Bitcoiners like we mentioned. I was
Mhm.
focused primarily on younger business owners at that point. And it wasn't until my business partner joined actually in the summer of 2023, and he was much further down the rabbit hole than I was. He had been, studying Bitcoin since 2017, and he had worked in financial planning much longer, but he wasn't able to talk about Bitcoin, at his other firms like he wanted to. And so we had this
Mm.
alignment, and through joining forces, if you will, and deciding to go into business together, he he brought me further down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. That's for sure. And so through that process, that transition, it really refined my perspective of Bitcoin and how it actually fundamentally changes financial planning rather than just being part of a portfolio like how I had viewed it previously.
Sure. Very interesting. Okay. So, what was the reaction back then and going forward from the general market? Were people apprehensive towards Bitcoin? Was it too early almost to say? Because I think as Bitcoiners we often overestimate how open the rest of the world is to this. Were you having trouble selling that idea to people? What was that why the switch was to Bitcoiners, or was it just a more natural alignment with your kind of your personality and your business and whatnot?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say we were necessarily having trouble selling it to people because the relationships that we had with folks were very there's a lot of trust there. We'll say.
Okay.
And so, they were willing to kind of follow us wherever we felt like was the best way to go. So there wasn't a lot of pushback. Obviously, we did some education before allocating to Bitcoin in every client's portfolios, I'll say, which we did before we actually started marketing, strictly to Bitcoiners.
Hmm.
And we allocated in a much larger allocation, we'll say, than I was previously. But yeah, for us, the impetus for the switch to really focusing on Bitcoiners was, you know, something that every business thinks about is, what is our competitive advantage? What do we know more about? What do we have expertise in more than anyone else or most others in our industry? And so, through again joining forces with Jacob, my business partner, and him having so much, Bitcoin experience, but also very technical knowledge. He's a super technical guy, so he was deep in the weeds on that as well. And that gains the respect of a lot of Bitcoiners, for sure. You're not just a TradFi finance bro anymore when you can go through, the deep technical aspects of self custody and all that stuff. And so yeah, so that was the impetus of okay, one, we view Bitcoin this way, but our clients don't. So there's just always that uneasiness maybe with this isn't actually how we would ideally like to structure maybe their investment portfolio or our advice. And so, we would align better with people who already understand Bitcoin and it's already a major part of their overall financial situation. And then also, us having that unique expertise that we can set ourselves apart with. We're really the two drivers, for going all in on just working with Bitcoiners over trying to convert normies, if you will, to Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, thank you for entertaining my line of questioning on that because it's something I think is very interesting. Because at Sovereign, we set out with the mission to orange pill the next wave of businesses and to really do that in the trenches work and educate people, bring them up to speed. But I will say honestly that it's been much harder than expected to take people from that zero to at least just a one. It is very,
Yeah.
very difficult, and you probably have experienced that as well. So it is a good question whether you want to focus your energy on educating people on Bitcoin and then having service around that, or you just want to focus on people that already get it and want to take it to the next level. And I do think that is more where we're starting to lean. So I'm just very interested in that. So who is the majority of your clients right now? Are they all Bitcoiners? Are they a mix of individuals and businesses? What kind of people are you working with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at this point, I would say we're probably 60% of our client base is what we would call Bitcoiners. We obviously had clients from before that have continued to work with us and kind of follow us on the journey into Bitcoin, of course. Yeah, so primarily Bitcoiners. We have, some business owners, some regular W 2 employees. We have some, retirees. So really all over the map. Like I mentioned, when we started, I was primarily focused on business owners. But then once we said, okay, we're gonna, start working with Bitcoiners, we opened that up to not only business owners, but employees, retirees, everywhere. Because if you get Bitcoin, then we can meet you where you are and help you navigate whatever the circumstances are, in your financial situation.
That's fantastic. And so what are these? So I guess it's obviously different if it's individuals or businesses, but what are these people coming to you for primarily? Is it a lot of different things or is there a common thread in your clients?
Yeah, I will say the biggest need that we see is estate planning around Bitcoin
Mm.
specifically. So whether they may have no estate plan in place at all, or they have a more traditional estate plan, we'll say, where maybe they're investment accounts have beneficiaries on them, or they do have maybe a trust in place and, for their other assets, but they have not incorporated Bitcoin into their overall estate and inheritance plan. So that seems to be the most common blind spot, I'll say, amongst Bitcoiners.
Mhm.
And I think before we pressed record, you were saying how, you think it's interesting, when I'm talking through Bitcoin not being a financial plan.
Yeah,
Most people, when they hear that, they're like, "Oh, you're just a TradFi guy trying to get someone to pay you money just so you can, encourage them not to sell when we're maybe in drawdowns like we're in right now with Bitcoin." It's like,
sure.
no, no, that's just not the case. And estate planning is a big, example of where Bitcoin does fundamentally change how we think through, the estate plan specifically. So for us, with that conversation, we're always starting with custody structure. Because if we don't have the preferred custody structure in place, or maybe the best fit, we'll say, for that person and their financial situation, their plan, maybe their family, their technical knowledge, etc., that's where we start. And so we'll go through our own framework that we've built out, the Strong Wealth Custody Framework, a very original name. But we go through that. It's a list of 10 questions that really brings into account every consideration we should be thinking about when we're deciding what the best custody solution is for you and your family. And so from there, we're going to educate a little bit about, okay, here are the different custody solutions out there, whether that's, on this extreme, holding on an exchange, or maybe the other extreme is multi-institutional, custody structure where client may hold no keys or just one key. And then all those in between of single sig, multi-sig, collaborative custody, et cetera. So, we'll go through, here's all the options, here are the trade-offs of each. We'll ask them, what their kind of preferences are. Maybe they are very privacy focused and that's a high priority to them, or they're not a technical person. And so they would like a structure that's more easy to use. Or maybe they are technical, but their wife and their kids are not. And so, the heirs who are going to be receiving this, there's some roadblocks there. And so we have to think through all of these trade-offs, land on the best custody solution, and then talk through, okay, we have to incorporate the Bitcoin into your legal estate plan, maybe a trust or something similar here in the United States. And then we also have to build out a Bitcoin inheritance protocol, which basically, the legal part of it, make sure that the right to ownership, the legal title, gets passed to the right people at the right time. And then the inheritance protocol is a treasure map, if you will, of here's how to track down the keys, here's the wallet structure, etc. Here's how to access the Bitcoin, and then maybe some additional information around here's what to do with it. Something has happened to me, the Bitcoiner, or often, obviously for our clients, it's contact these guys and make sure, you get their support through this. So
That's
that's just
fantastic.
one example. That's just one example of something that's not investing specific related, that we're doing for Bitcoiners that I see is a major blind spot and something that they are coming to us to get advice around.
Right. Right. So it seems it is almost like you're bringing in the normal legality of an estate structure and really getting registering the stuff with the state and with the right people so that it's actually legally set up correctly and not just some seed plate you've buried in your backyard. Is that maybe correctly understood?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a common thing that Bitcoiners will say is why can't I just hand the keys to whomever, I want them to go
Sure.
to? Okay, when do you do that?
Yeah.
Another question. Do you give it to them before you pass away? Because then they have access to the Bitcoin. Do you want that? Do you trust them enough to be able to have access to it before you pass away? Okay, maybe you wait until afterwards. What's the chances that they don't get it, they forget about it, or whatever? They're going through a time when you just passed away, and there may be a lot of turmoil, whether it be among the family or
Yeah.
just emotionally losing a loved one. And so, there's some other issues outside of that with, okay, you just give the keys to your kids. Now you have essentially given these assets to someone outside of the estate process. And so there is no legal documentation of, okay, me, maybe just an example, own the Bitcoin, and now I'm passing it to my kids who now own the Bitcoin. And so you can basically put a target on your kids' back, essentially, if you want to think about it that way, with tax
Mm,
fraud risks, because it's passing completely out of the legal estate process. Or, let's say you wanted your son to receive the Bitcoin, but your brother was like, hey, he told me he was going to receive he was going to give it to me. And now all of a sudden there's no documentation. And you have a legal battle between son and brother, around who gets the Bitcoin.
nice.
And so if we just, once we talk through all the implications around that, most Bitcoiners, even if coming into it, they were like, screw the government, screw all that stuff. I'm just going to do everything outside the system under the radar. They eventually are like, well, you know, we'll go ahead and do it that way. I think it's best because you may make the choice to operate outside of the legal system, outside of the financial system, and that's what Bitcoin gives you the opportunity to do. Absolutely. If you take that to the complete extreme, you're trying to have complete privacy. You may be not reporting it on taxes. All this stuff. It is illegal at the end of the day. And so if you're making that decision for yourself, okay, you've accepted that risk. But all of a sudden now, when you pass those assets in that way to whoever you want to receive them, you are making that choice for them. They didn't get to choose that risk for themselves. And so, like I said, most people will come to the conclusion of, okay, let's just do this the legal way and, do it right, if you will.
No, that makes perfect sense. Thank you for elaborating on that. It's not something I hear discussed very often, so I'm glad we got to talk about that. Switching gears, let's so we talked a little bit about individuals. I'd love to hear what you guys are doing for businesses. I guess both what kinds of businesses you're working with and what do they come to you for?
Yeah, so I will say we're working with the individual owners of businesses. We're not necessarily advising the entity itself, if you will, on
Mm-hmm.
strictly from a business perspective. Where I know that that's what you guys would be doing, with your service, which is amazing because I think we even sent one of our clients your way because he works for he's not the owner, but he works for like a commercial painting business, and he was trying to push ownership to start adopting Bitcoin on their balance sheet,
Mm-hmm.
and they were, completely ignorant to Bitcoin. And so he was like, can I, get you guys to talk with them? And I'm like, we don't necessarily want to try to convince them about Bitcoin, like,
Mm.
and so, it's perfect to send them your guys' way, so that you can start from ground zero and hopefully, get them up to speed and then point them in whatever direction they need to go from there. So for us, we're really looking at it from when we're working with business owners. The biggest thing that we're looking at first and foremost is usually taxes. So we do a lot of tax planning for our clients and tax
Mm-hmm.
strategy. And when someone has a business, it really opens up the amount of things that we can utilize, the amount of tools in our tool belt, if you will, to be able
Right.
to save on taxes. And so that's a big one with business owners. That's different from someone who doesn't own a business. If they want to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet, or they are, maybe they already own it personally, all those things, and they want to hold Bitcoin, own it through the business, we'll talk about that as well and the implications and things they should be thinking about. But yeah, like I said, it's not like we're taking a
Right.
$50 million C corp that has however many owners. I guess with it being a C corp, it's a separate entity, but it's not a good example. But you know what I mean? A big entity, and we're
Right,
just
right.
talking to the entity about maybe their financials or whatever it is. Like we're not
Sure.
going through that with businesses.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, so it is more about the financial planning and wealth management for the business owner itself, given the implications of being a business owner, whether you have a pass-through entity or just the amount of
Yeah.
optionality and complexity that opens up when you're a business owner, especially with Bitcoin as well. It's very, very interesting. Okay, I see. So what kind of this is something that maybe selfishly I'm always thinking about. What is there some common trends or commonalities between the people that's coming to you? Is it, you said you were going for younger business owners or clients. Is that still the case, or is it much more broad and wide today?
Yeah, definitely much more broad and wide for sure. I will say a big trigger for people reaching out at this point is retirement. So whether it's approaching
Mm,
retirement within the next 5 years, or they want to retire at the end of this year, at the top of the bull market, if you will, if it plays out like we have seen historically. And so, or they're in retirement, in the early years, like within the first 5 years of, quitting their job or, selling their business, whatever it may be. And so that has been a big trigger moment, a life event that has caused people to reach out recently, because there's some rules of thumb that people like to follow with traditional assets when it comes to a retirement plan that Bitcoin just kind of throws out the window. And so when you have someone who's maybe 100, we have some people who are fully allocated to Bitcoin 100%. They're like, how do I think through a retirement plan when, Bitcoin could be, you know, 250,000 by the end of the year and then maybe 50,000 again in 2026, or the wide range of possibilities are just so extreme. And so working with us through a retirement plan, through tax strategy around that, has been something that a lot of people, it has spurred a lot of people to reach out and get guidance on.
Thank you for sharing that. I think I'll pull on that inflate or not inflation, excuse me, volatility question, because that is obviously the biggest concern. It's also what I'm hearing from people whenever we're talking about Bitcoin in business. Yes, I love it. It's great. I know the returns are there. I know there's a great Sharpe ratio, but what do I do about this volatility, right? So what do you tell people? What
Yeah.
what are the conversations like there?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. So, usually, if someone is that, let's say that extreme allocated to Bitcoin, they're all in, they're used to the volatility,
Mm,
but it's a matter of, they're not worried necessarily about sleeping at night, or Bitcoin, but they're worried about, overspending while Bitcoin is in a sharp drawdown or a drawn out bear market.
mm,
So like I said, in that example, let's say somebody has 20 Bitcoin, what is it, 80, we're at 70 something, I don't know. $80,000, it's like 1.6 million. I don't know. That's rough math. I'm usually not super good
sure.
at mental math on the fly. But anyways, that amount of money or the value of their Bitcoin right now, and then okay, it could be 3.2 by the end of this year. Bitcoin doubles from here. Okay, great. I feel a lot wealthier. But, okay, we go into the 4 year cycle and, we're back into the deep bear market 2026, 2027. How much can I afford to spend to make sure that I'm not spending down my stack too much, to where I'm ultimately sacrificing the longevity of my assets? So,
Yeah.
it's a much different thing if you're spending, let's say, $200,000 a year and the Bitcoin's worth 3.2 million versus you're spending $200,000 a year and the Bitcoin's worth 1 million. You're spending a lot more in Bitcoin terms, during that time than you are when we're in the peak of the bull market and everything feels great. And so, yes, that's, one thing that we're addressing right now. And how we typically do that, we actually have a YouTube video that goes over high level structure of it. But we can still use Bitcoin as a long term savings vehicle, and we'll say, okay, any assets that you're not going to need to spend for the next maybe 5, 10 plus years, we'll just continue to hold in Bitcoin. And then we've actually developed a active trading strategy that includes Bitcoin and traditional assets. It doesn't, necessarily have to include traditional assets, but essentially what we are solving for here is we're modulating the Bitcoin volatility. So we're applying,
Mm,
a couple simple trading signals, if you will, around Bitcoin that we can still allow our clients to experience the upside, but will help kind of cap the volatility to the downside so that we're not having to spend assets when they're worth significantly less, in a bear market. So our short to medium term kind of assets we will just modulate the volatility on that, and that really helps smooth out, the near term for a retirement plan, so that we're not causing a bunch of issues, and maybe having to brush up our resume 10 to 20 years from now.
Brilliant. I'm very happy you touched on that because I did watch that video and I found it very, very intriguing. I'd love to actually just poke a little bit more on that. So in that
Sure.
scenario, so we got the long-term Bitcoin. When you are planning this now more medium term with some other assets, are you limiting the
Yeah.
Bitcoin position and taking some of that into these other assets, or are you just putting more money into that to balance the portfolio? Just beginner question, just trying to understand how it really works.
Wait, say that again. I want to make sure I'm understanding.
Right, so let's say you have your Bitcoin set aside for long term, but now you want to use the strategy you're talking about of having some different assets in there for the short to medium term. Are you taking that out of the Bitcoin position and then buying those other assets, or are you funding that with new money? Like, how is that rebalancing the portfolio?
Yeah, so in the extreme example that we were using with 100% allocated, Bitcoiner, which
Hmm.
I'll say that I think if you scroll through Bitcoin Twitter, you feel like everyone's 100% allocated, but when you actually peek behind the curtain, that's usually not the case. And so that's our experience. But, on the extreme with 100% allocation, yes, we are going to sell some of the Bitcoin and go into other things. And we may just do that in a strategic way, though, because, again, like I said, we have our trading strategy built out to where we're just following market signals essentially, and if we get those signals, that may be a great time to go ahead and liquidate part of the position, and then move it into cash or other traditional assets. So that's an extreme scenario where yes, we would be selling Bitcoin to do that, but most of the time, no. Most of the time, we are doing this strategy with existing assets that are already outside or not cold storage Bitcoin, we'll say. And so for us, the perspective that we take with Bitcoin is it really can be savings and it can be investment. I know that that's controversial in the Bitcoin space. I understand why. Totally get it. We're not in a world yet where we're living on a Bitcoin standard. I know that some people they'll say I'm in that world already. Okay, I get it. I understand. But for most people, we're trying to still navigate this blended world where our lives are still denominated in dollars. And yes, we see Bitcoin, but we still have all of these other implications to where like I said before, when we're spending $200,000 a year and our Bitcoin's worth 3 million, it's a lot different than when it's worth one. So,
Yeah.
anyways, there can be two different ways to view Bitcoin for us where, okay, we have savings, which is our long term cold storage. We're never touching it. We're not applying a trading strategy to that. No. And then, we have our investment allocation to Bitcoin, which we are applying the trading strategy to. And so most of the time, most folks, they have other assets. And so we will apply this strategy to those other assets, whether it's in retirement or not in retirement. That doesn't really make a difference to us. We find that most people, if they're investing in Bitcoin, or saving in Bitcoin, whatever you want to say, outside of that, they're doing maybe it's real estate or they have index funds or they're doing something else, whether that was these were assets that they owned prior to coming to Bitcoin, or they just still don't feel comfortable 100% allocated to Bitcoin. And so for us, we're like, well, this strategy that we build will be a great fit for these other assets because we can still use Bitcoin to drive performance. We've seen great performance out of Bitcoin. And so do we need to just buy and hold with all of our Bitcoin allocation? No. We can still have our savings that we never touch. And then we can kind of pseudo increase your Bitcoin allocation over here with, a managed Bitcoin allocation, if you will, within our strategy. So to answer your question, I know that was a more drawn out answer, but to answer it, it's like, okay, if someone's 100%, yes, we may reallocate out, but that is not common at this point.
Mm.
I will say that because again, people, if you scroll through Bitcoin Twitter, you feel like that's not true. This guy's, making this up, whatever. Um, it's much easier to be fully allocated to Bitcoin when you're still working, you're still making money, you're still accumulating. However, when you're living off of the assets and your wife, it wants to feel secure, you want to make sure you can continue to stay retired. You want to be able to go on a trip to Italy or where, over where you are. It's like, it's a much different mindset then. If
Yeah.
Bitcoin's down 50, 70, 80, 90%, and I'm still working, bringing in money, I'm still stacking, I'm happy for the opportunity. If I'm selling, spending it, or borrowing against it, even, that's another option in a retirement
Mhm.
period. It's a much different experience. And so, I'll just say that with the people who are maybe already feeling the pushback of, you know, uh, everyone should be 100% allocated, basically.
Right. No, it makes perfect sense. It really does, and I appreciate you giving us that little inside tidbit because I definitely do agree with you that we can sometimes feel like everybody's 100% on Bitcoin, but it depends on your situation. And I think we can sort of analogize this to businesses as well because I don't recommend a business to go just 100% in on Bitcoin instantly. That's not necessarily, and I think I agree with you as well. There are certain people in Bitcoin that are potentially very zealous about being on a Bitcoin standard and only spending in Bitcoin, saving Bitcoin, doing everything in Bitcoin. And that is fantastic. And I have a lot of respect for these people. But we are still living in a fiat world. And so we have to merge these two kind of ideas. Something I'm very, very interested in is, and I would love to hear your perspective on this, Bitcoin integrated into traditional or new kind of financial products. Like you put Bitcoin in with bonds. Now you get a lot of upside, but you limit the downside, you limit the volatility. That is something that I see having a big future for corporate allocations. Now, definitely some people should just go 100% in. They should go 120. They want to do the sailor playbook, that strategy. We'll help them do that. But for a lot of people, it
Yeah.
might just be a 20, 30, 50% allocation. And maybe they want to hold some different bonds or other financial instruments with Bitcoin on them. So you're getting some of the upside, but you're limiting the downside. I'd love to hear your perspective on that and if that's something you guys are working with actually.
No, I mean, we're not. Our version of working with that is the investment strategy that we've built out to
I see.
where there is a need for this type of stuff. Where yes, we still Bitcoin can be very beneficial, but it doesn't have to be holding spot Bitcoin in cold storage.
Yeah.
And so for us, our investment strategy is our approach to helping maybe Bitcoin meet people where they're at, we'll say, in some ways, or just benefit their situation, whatever their circumstances look like. But yeah, I mean, I see a strong future as well for these type of products where Bitcoin is integrated into, bonds like you're saying, or some other type of structure to where we can still get the benefits to some extent of Bitcoin without having to deal with the extreme volatility because it's just not a fit for everybody. Like you're saying, and so whether that's a business or whatever, I see, the thing that I see most beneficial is we get people involved. We get them off zero,
Yes.
and so if that's what it takes to kind of sneak Bitcoin in to their lives, if you will, or help them just get their
Yes.
toes wet. I'm all for it, and so yeah, I can see a big future where those type of products are very beneficial, especially to businesses like you're mentioning.
Absolutely. No, I think we're complete agreement there because if we set the bar so high that people think it's irresponsible, we're keeping people away. And I think the same, or I know the same arguments come up as you were saying, well, if I'm living off of my Bitcoin and I'm maybe at an advanced age and I have to spend that money, it's a different case. That's the same for a business. You say, well, yes, I have Bitcoin on my balance sheet, but what if I need that money? What if I need to make payroll and need it for liquidity? Well, you solve that simply by not being 100% on Bitcoin, setting a target cash balance, managing your finances just like you would in a traditional company. I would not be against telling somebody, keep your money market funds, keep your sweep accounts, keep your savings account, keep all that. But then let's incorporate Bitcoin into that in a way that it's working symbiotically with what's already going on. And I have an idea that as you get off zero and you dip your toes, you're gonna want more. You're not gonna stop at that 10% or 20%. You're gonna learn to find wherever you're comfortable at. But if we say, oh, you have to be 100% in, that's not gonna onboard the next million people. There's no doubt about that.
Mm-mm.
Um,
I mean, none of us started there. Let's be honest. Like none of us started there. I maybe there's some people out there where they just went 0 to 100 and good for them. But everyone that I've talked to, it did not start that way. It
no.
was okay. This is interesting. I'm gonna buy a little bit. I'm gonna forget about it. Maybe even lose it, and then it's gonna, we get to the next bull market, and all of a sudden I'm like, wow, this is still on the map, and it's worth this much more than where I bought it from. Maybe I should start doing some research, where we start to go into altcoins or whatever it is. I mean, we all started that in that
Yeah.
position, and so it's like, how do we, we're expecting someone to take the same journey we did, but take out the entire middle. It's like you need to go from the start to where I am rather than actually, going down the path, that we've all gone down. So it's important to keep that perspective of kind of, where we started and the journey to how we got here. But I'm totally with you on a, from a business perspective. Even if let's say you had 95% cash, 5% Bitcoin, your financial performance, if you will, your preservation of your purchasing power is going to be so extremely better than being 100% cash, and you will not even notice the volatility. I mean, we've been doing a lot of analysis on small allocations to Bitcoin and how they change standard portfolios, whether it's, the cash example that I mentioned that may be great for a business, or it's a 60-40 portfolio for someone in retirement. Even 5-10% allocations really do not change volatility too much. And so, you won't notice, that allocation to the downside very much, but the experience and how it's going to support you to the upside makes it very worthwhile. So the risk reward, if you want to think about it that way,
Yes.
is you're in a very good position even with a small allocation.
That's very well said. I think that's, you could boil it down to that. The risk reward ratio is extremely outsized when you do it intelligently. Yeah, and I guess riffing off of that, I was thinking, do you think so? I have my open secret is I think everybody's gonna have Bitcoin in the future. I think every business is gonna have it on their balance sheet. Some people think I'm naive to think that. I'm not saying that everybody's gonna be a Bitcoin maximalist, but do you think the same? Well, how do you see that future for Bitcoin?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think everyone needs Bitcoin right now. It's not
Yeah.
like, I don't think there's any question about that. It's just a matter of, are you going to take the time to do the work and come to understand why you need it? But yeah, I mean, I think that, like we're saying, even just a small allocation can benefit every single person, business, whatever. And, in the financial planning, financial advice industry, it's hard, or we're not allowed to say that everyone should do something,
Mm,
because usually certain advice doesn't apply to everyone.
right.
So I'll just give that caveat of that's not financial advice, but I see Bitcoin being beneficial in every situation that I've come across, we'll say. And so, yes, I'm 100% with you that I think everyone will eventually come to see that they must own some Bitcoin. It's just a matter of when are you going to come to that realization. And in my mind, you should take the time to do your due diligence, your research, and come to that realization a lot sooner than later, because that risk reward that we're talking about, I think the opportunity for that reward is running out, honestly. You know, maybe not. Maybe I could be wrong, but I think, you know, especially right now with what's going on with Trump and tariffs and all of this trade war talk and everything, I think that a lot of these other foreign countries are starting to realize, hey, we maybe don't want to store our wealth in US treasuries in the dollar. Let's look for neutral assets. Yes, there's gold. That's traditionally been the place that they go, but they are starting to wake up and see that Bitcoin is, that option. And once central banks start to allocate, even if it's just this small, amount that we're referring to, you know, they have a lot more purchasing power, we'll say, than me or you or the plebs of the world. And so once that kind of fully does that dam breaks, if you will, I think the that reward opportunity that we're talking about is going to you know become a lot less very quickly.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. The information asymmetry is only there for a limited time. And while Bitcoin will most likely continue to appreciate forever as a thermodynamically sound, ultimately digitally scarce asset,
Yep.
diminishing returns is certainly a reality in this universe. And I think once the nation states and the central banks and the sovereign wealth funds wake up to this, that's the end game. And the outsized returns for the average person will be gone at that point, and that's why it's so important to get in now because everybody desperately needs Bitcoin, in my opinion. I'd love to ask you, even though you said you're not advising businesses themselves, since this is the Bitcoin Business Podcast, what is the business case for Bitcoin in your mind, in your words? Why do you think Bitcoin belongs on the balance sheet of an organization which isn't normally preoccupied with growing their balance sheet or investing? It's just a normal operating company. Why should they even consider Bitcoin? It seems very foreign to a lot of people.
Well, I mean, in my mind, it allows um, businesses to thrive financially. When we're talking about the financial health of a business, when you are more financially healthy as a business, you can actually focus on serving, you can focus on quality, you can focus on innovating for the future. You can focus on all of these things that continue to help push your competitive advantage forward, or just take care of the people who are your customers or your clients. Like in the fiat world, you're constantly forced to continue to make more money and do it
Mhm.
faster. And so what we've seen, since we've gone to a complete fiat standard, is the quality of maybe service or products, everything is just slowly degraded over time.
Yes.
And so when you're able to take a step back, take a deep breath, and kind of detach from that race of we have to be more profitable every single quarter, we have to make more money, constantly, or we're going backwards, you're able to focus on what truly matters. You're not idolizing money any longer. You're actually focusing on taking care of your customers, creating good products, delivering a quality service, because you're not forced to continue to make more and to have more profit, and that is your largest, highest priority, if you will. So in my mind, that's where I see Bitcoin being so necessary and beneficial for businesses, is you kind of just get out of this rat race, of feeling like
Mm.
you need to continue to expand, you need to get bigger, you need to grow, make more, etc. So even for a smaller business, like when we're looking at, how much cash should you keep on hand, like as lean as we're normally willing to go is like 3 months of operating expenses. And that's a 3 month runway for a business to where, okay, let's say COVID happens, or,
Yeah.
something happens and your service, you have an issue with your service, or maybe, I don't know what it is, but something disrupts your
Whatever.
business. Now you have a 3 month runway. That's not very long, but it's, you don't want to have too much cash on hand, because then, as we know, and hopefully people listening to this know, you're consistently losing value on that cash. And it's becoming, you're losing that value much quicker over time. So, for me, it's like, we would always look at the business as, okay, when can we pull money out and get it into assets for the business owner, or, whatever that looks like. So like once we have 3 months of OPEX, like let's distribute money out, distribute profits out, and let's invest or do something with that so it's not losing value. But what that effectively removes is the ability to reinvest into the business. Like I'm saying, really detach and be able to focus on quality
Yeah.
rather than just profits over everything else.
That was a fantastic explanation, Mitch. That was really well said, and I think that would hit anybody. That was like very beginner friendly, very to the point. I appreciated that. It's it seems it got me thinking. It's almost twofold in a sense. You need that treasury or that runway as like a savings account. You need that in times of turmoil and in times of uncertainty.
Yep.
But I think something so that's not uncommon for people and that's taught in business school. But the problem is there's really nothing worthwhile to put on that balance sheet. Something
Yeah.
that I think is very fascinating and why I think Saylor is changing the world is that the balance sheet, he's not looking at it as a rainy day account. He's using it to grow his business, to grow the enterprise value of the business. I think that is very fascinating because in the last couple decades, companies have just been valued on their cash flow, their discounted cash flow, their future earnings, all that kind of stuff. The balance sheet is it's a second thought, right? And COVID comes around, billion dollar companies just fold. That's just ridiculous. And honestly, it's
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily their fault. I would question some certain bonuses and stuff, but the point is they haven't chosen to exist in a fiat system. They are getting ground up and they have no choice until Bitcoin existed. Um, do you think people are going to be interested in that narrative of actually growing their Bitcoin or business with Bitcoin, or are they more going to see it as a right now a lot of the narrative is as a hedge against inflation, against monetary debasement or political instability. It's an uncorrelated asset. It's something you might want to keep. Do you think that's going to keep being the narrative, or are people going to really be interested in sort of replicating the Sailor playbook and using it as a weapon on their balance sheet?
I mean, um, maybe, public companies. But, when I think about businesses, I'm thinking about the small business owner, just down the street and whatnot. So maybe
Hmm.
large public companies, they'll want to implement that playbook. Where, all of us can't issue new shares and,
Right.
raise capital through debt. I mean, I guess we could, but that's just not a common thing, among small businesses. Whereas it's much easier to do as a public company for sure. So I could see them going down that path, but for me, thinking about the small business owner, um, it's I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought a bit. Um, you were saying
No
your
worries,
the
just
narrative.
whether they're going to be interested in aggressively pursuing Bitcoin or
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just
okay.
like a fallback strategy, I guess.
Well, okay, yeah. So thank you for getting me back on track.
Of course.
Like you're saying, Saylor is weaponizing the balance sheet. The balance sheet has essentially become his business. Like, I don't, yes, they have the software business, but I don't think anyone really looks at that as the legitimate long term business that they have. They're going to have
Hmm.
to, in my mind, they're going to have to pivot into something else at some point. This, you know, um, narrative of accumulating as much Bitcoin as possible, or BTC yield, if you will, it will just run out eventually, in my perspective, and they'll have to actually do something, with the capital. Yeah, again, thinking about the smaller business owner, they don't necessarily just want to accumulate as much assets as possible on their balance sheet. They want to run a great business. And so whether
Hmm.
that's be more profitable, expand, reinvest in their people or their quality or their infrastructure, whatever that looks like, that's what they're thinking about. they're thinking about how does it actually translate, my balance sheet translate into improving my business and the overall quality of our service products, maybe life for our for our employees and whatnot. And so I don't think that going all in like you're mentioning is going to be happening anytime soon for that type of small business owner. But I think the narrative that you said you've been hearing and that has been thrown around for a while is still a worthwhile narrative for someone who has no Bitcoin right now on their business balance sheet, and they need to get off zero, because that's really what that Bitcoin is going to help them do in the short term, so that when there are opportunities to put that capital to work, they'll be able to do it.
That's a great answer. I hope I'm not pressing too hard on this. This is some very out there kind of new concepts, but I like your answer to that, and I like getting your thoughts on this. Are you guys allocating to Bitcoin at Strong Wealth? Is that something you would consider if you're not?
Oh, our business, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes. I mean, to be completely transparent, that's all that I have personally, and my business partner as well, outside of Bitcoin mining, and maybe his home. But that's what we're allocating to in our personal lives. We haven't necessarily specifically decided to start a Bitcoin treasury, if you will, within the business. But I'm sure that's in our future at some point, if we continue to want to expand and grow. For us, we're really focused on keeping a small knit kind of family type environment with our business and with our clients as well. So, aggressive growth isn't necessarily our ultimate target. We're just taking growth as it comes and making sure that we're taking good care of our clients along the way.
Fantastic. No, listen, let's end it on that. Other than, is there something you'd want our listeners to know? Anything you'd like to end this on, Mitch?
Yeah, I mean, I think the basic phrase that we like to throw out is Bitcoin is not, or we'll say hodling is not a financial plan.
Nice.
I went on a couple other podcasts and they said they named the title or whatever, Bitcoin's not a financial plan, but normally how I phrase it is hodling is not a financial plan.
Mm,
And so, if we just kind of zoom out a little bit and think about, what do we want our wealth to achieve for us? Most people, they are solely focused on Bitcoin being the end and not realizing that Bitcoin is actually a means to an end. And so, what is the actual end game for you? Is that retirement, a better life for your family, growing your business, whatever it is, you need to tie these dots from numbers on a screen to your actual life. And that's where financial planning comes into play. It's how do we take, the wealth that we have and translate it into the best life for us, or protect ourselves against potential risks or liabilities that could eliminate the wealth that we've been able to accumulate through insurance, estate planning and inheritance, custody, all of those things. And so for us, usually when I say we're financial planners for Bitcoiners, people will start to push back and be like, well, no, Bitcoin is my financial advisor. Which I listened to your first episode, and I think your CEO said that. He said my financial advisor is Bitcoin and my cold storage wallet. So maybe we could have a conversation with him. But I thought that was funny because that is the typical response. But when I get people to zoom back out and think about all of these other factors, they're like, oh, okay, hodling is not a financial plan at the end of the day. I need to be
nice.
considering all of the surrounding, considerations with my finances and my future, to make sure that I'm giving Bitcoin the ultimate respect and intentional planning that it deserves.
No, man, I love that. I think it's perfect. You guys are bridging the Bitcoin world with some of the traditional strategies and tools that are available, making people aware of that. I think that's a very sound strategy. Man, Mitch, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people, if they want to work with you, where can they find both you and Strong Wealth?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to strongwealth.net. That's our website. Check out, learn more about our services there. If you want to watch more content, you can go to our YouTube channel. It's at Mitch D. Moore is my username, or this is the name on Twitter as well. So feel free to go to those resources and you can learn a lot more about us and our business.
Excellent. Highly recommend that YouTube channel. Great content on there. So, thank you so much for coming on,
Thanks.
Mitch. This was great. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity, Daniel.
Goodbye.